Violet Reyes hesitated for a moment at the bottom of the gangplank, her bare feet touching the polished wood of the yacht's deck. The sleek yacht, glistening under the early evening sun, was a floating palace of modern luxury, gleaming chrome fixtures, pristine white leather seats, and sparkling crystal chandeliers swaying gently above. The scent of expensive cologne and fresh flowers mixed with the salty sea air, signaling a celebration reserved for an exclusive crowd. Violet clutched the well-worn strap of her bag, the fraying fabric a stark contrast to the designer clutches carried by women drifting past her in glittering gowns. Her simple thrift store dress draped loosely around her frame, unadorned by makeup or jewelry. She noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere as several guests caught sight of her, whispered comments, sideways glances, lips curling into smirks. The opulence engulfed her like a quiet storm, but beneath her fears simmered a determined calm. She walked forward, mindful to keep her shoulders square and her gaze steady. The yacht staff manager, a tall woman with impeccable posture and an expression of practiced superiority, caught sight of Violet almost immediately. Narrowing her eyes, she examined the bare feet, the worn bag, the posture that seemed both hesitant and resolute. To her left, two women in shimmering gowns exchanged loud remarks about the barefoot newcomer. "Is she part of the crew? Or just lost?" one whispered with a snicker, causing a ripple of laughter from nearby guests. Violet felt the sting in their voices, but held her ground, letting the waves of exclusion wash over her without breaking. The night was just beginning, and already she sensed that the real challenge lay ahead. The staff manager, Caroline, swept across the yacht's polished deck with the precision of someone accustomed to control. Her heels clicked sharply against the wood as she closed the distance to Violet. There was an edge in her voice that cut through the hum of polite conversation and clinking glasses. "Excuse me, madam," Caroline said smoothly, her eyes locked on Violet's bare feet. "Are you lost? This event is strictly for invited guests." Violet met Caroline's gaze steadily, though her heart thrummed uncomfortably in her chest. She spoke softly but clearly, "I was invited by a close associate. I'm here to enjoy the evening." The words felt fragile against the buzz of whispered interjections from nearby guests who had now stopped to watch. Caroline's lips curled into a thin, disapproving smile. "I'm afraid I must ask for proof of invitation. We have strict policies to maintain the atmosphere here." Her eyes flicked pointedly to Violet's feet, then down to her threadbare bag. "And I'm afraid your appearance is, frankly, inappropriate for this occasion." A murmur ran through the gathering crowd as Caroline raised her voice slightly. "We cannot allow anyone who is not properly attired to mingle with our guests." She turned to the assembled bystanders, and a man nearby who had been swirling a glass of champagne smirked and added loudly, "She looks like she just wandered off the dock barefoot." Laughter spilled from a small cluster of guests, their phones already raising to film the spectacle. Violet's cheeks flamed with heat, but she didn't step back. The oppressive attention weighed on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe, but she kept her composure. She raised her chin slightly, willing herself not to break into tears, despite the sting of humiliation. "I'm sorry, but I'm here." She barely whispered, as if saying it louder would only invite more scorn. Caroline's gaze sharpened, and she signaled to a security guard who was discreetly stationed nearby. "Please escort this guest to the rear deck," she instructed without hesitation, her voice impeccably professional yet edged with finality. "She is not allowed in the main salon." Violet froze, her body stiffening instantly. The flood of embarrassment swelled inside her. Her eyes scanned the guests, none moved to intervene. Some looked away with polite disinterest, others stifled giggles behind their hands. The weight of exclusion threatened to shatter her balance, but she forced herself to remain still. The guard approached silently and took Violet's arm gently but firmly, guiding her away from the cluster of VIP guests and into a dimmer, quieter corner of the yacht's rear deck. The sounds of laughter and conversation faded behind her like an unreachable world. As Violet sat on a solitary bench, the cold sea breeze brushing past her, she looked back toward the main salon through the glass doors. The faces she had seen, filled with amusement, cruelty, or indifference, were still there, still watching from a distance without lifting a hand in her defense. The realization settled deeply: no one was coming to help her. Her heart ached, not just from the cold or the sting of public rejection, but from the isolation. Around her, the party went on as if she didn't exist. The glaring contrast between the glittering celebration and her own solitude made her feel like a ghost in a gilded cage. She clasped her hands tightly in her lap, fingers trembling. The embarrassment burned hot across her skin, yet beneath it, a sharper sting flickered: anger. Not overt or loud, but simmering quietly, demanding acknowledgement even in this moment of vulnerability. She exhaled slowly and wiped her sleeve across her eyes, careful not to draw more attention. That's when she noticed the faintest flurry of movement near the entrance to the rear deck. A well-dressed man with a briefcase stepped forward. His presence was calm but deliberate, and the respectful bow he gave Violet caused some nearby guests to pause and murmur curiously. Violet's bruised confidence flickered. Was this man here to offer some kind of assistance? Who could he be? The fragile hope sparked by his gesture was quickly overshadowed by Caroline's sharp voice carrying from the main deck, reminding everyone of the rules that had just pushed Violet away. Violet lowered her gaze, but this time with a quiet determination. Whatever this night had in store would test her, but she was unwilling to vanish quietly. The whispers, the laughter, the barbs, they could not define her. She straightened slowly, preparing to face whatever came next. Caroline retreated slightly, her heels clicking sharply against the gleaming floor as she returned to the main salon. In her mind, she replayed the encounter with a carefully rehearsed sense of accomplishment. Maintaining the yacht's pristine exclusivity was no small task, and today she had upheld a boundary that, in her eyes, was vital for preserving the image of opulence. Allowing a barefoot, plainly dressed woman to roam among the elite guests was unthinkable. "This place needs to stay perfect," she murmured under her breath, eyes scanning the crowd for approval. Around her, guests resumed their laughter and conversations as though the interruption hadn't happened. Some refreshed their champagne, others returned to their whispered gossip. For Caroline, the brief wave of excitement from the public spectacle was replaced by the comfortable certainty that she had handled it right. Meanwhile, Violet sat alone on the rear deck, alone but not beaten. The cool ocean breeze tugged softly at her simple dress, but inside, she felt a storm of emotions roiling silently. She clutched the bench's cold wooden edge, her bare feet resting gingerly on the deck's polished surface. A quiet frustration gnawed at her, mingled with sorrow for the cold welcome she'd endured. She wiped at the faint trace of tears gathering in her eyes, her lips pressed tight against the urge to cry. Her mind flashed briefly to the faint bow from the man who had appeared just as Caroline had dismissed her. Who could he be? Violet's curiosity sparked, and though she longed to retreat into herself, something held her firm in place. She straightened her back and fixed her eyes toward the yacht's upper decks, where the festive noise swirled. It wasn't long before the man approached again. This time, he paused by her side and introduced himself quietly. "Ms. Reyes, my name is Thomas Preston. I'm with Merrick Capital. I believe you were expecting this." He handed her a small, embossed envelope sealed with the company's elegant logo. Violet's fingers trembled slightly as she accepted it. Thomas glanced at the lively crowd beyond the glass doors, then lowered his voice. "The yacht's ownership is under Merrick Capital. You're our key investor and respected partner. We were concerned about today's events." His tone held a mixture of respect and apology. Violet nodded, clutching the envelope. The significance hit her anew. The place where she'd felt so out of place was, in fact, connected deeply to her. She felt a strange mixture of vindication and disbelief. There was no subtlety left in the scene now. Thomas gave a polite bow towards Violet that was unmistakably formal, and unmistakable to those looking. Eyes began to turn, whispers beginning to ripple through the guests like the tide. Inside, Caroline's attention snapped unexpectedly toward the rear deck's entrance. Her breath caught momentarily as she recognized the man's purposeful demeanor and the direction of his bow. A subtle dread crept in, momentarily unraveling the confident facade she wore so carefully. Muffled murmurs flowed outward. Guests stepped closer to the windows, phones still raised but now capturing a different kind of moment. A shift in the atmosphere was undeniable, intrigue replacing amusement, curiosity edging out disdain. Back on the deck, Violet stood upright, her heart pounding steadily. The embarrassment of earlier moments warred with a newfound strength. She knew the scrutiny was far from over, but today's script was changing, and she wasn't just acting in the shadows anymore. As Thomas stepped back, he took in the crowd's shifting mood with a quiet satisfaction. "I believe it's time everyone understands who you truly are, Ms. Reyes." His words were soft, but carried the weight of an unshakable truth. Violet looked once more toward the lively upper decks, feeling the full weight of the night's turning tides. The story that had begun in whispered insults and cold rejection was now unfolding in bright, unexpected light. The yacht's guests had been blind to her presence, but no longer. And for Caroline, the staff manager, the real battle was just beginning. Her carefully constructed world, built on exclusivity, polished appearances, and rigid control, was starting to crack. Violet was ready to step forward. The atmosphere on board shifted palpably as Thomas Preston moved to the center of the yacht's grand salon, commanding attention. The lively chatter began to dissolve into hushed curiosity. Some guests set down their glasses, casting puzzled glances toward the rear deck entrance where Violet had been sequestered. With measured grace, Thomas raised his hand for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice clear and steady, "I would like to formally introduce Violet Reyes." His eyes met hers briefly before continuing. "Ms. Reyes is not simply a guest. She is our leading investor and a key figure in Merrick Capital, the very ownership group behind this yacht." A wave of surprised gasps swept through the room. Conversations stalled as phones were raised, now recording for a very different reason. Onlookers who had been quick to dismiss Violet just moments before stared in disbelief, their previous smirks fading into awkward silence. Caroline stood frozen near the entrance to the salon, shock plastered across her face. Her eyes darted from Violet to Thomas, her carefully maintained composure unraveling. The realization hit her like a slap. The barefoot woman she'd publicly humiliated wielded power far beyond the reach of the sleek uniforms and polished veneers she managed. Guests began whispering frantically, the air thick with regret. The two women who had loudly mocked Violet's simple dress and bare feet looked away, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. A few attempted hurried apologies, but Violet's cool, composed demeanor silenced further attempts at confrontation. Violet stepped forward, moving effortlessly between whispers and stares. Her voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority. "I understand why many found my appearance here surprising. I dress this way by choice," she said, gesturing to her barefoot stance and minimalist clothing. "This is a vow I took after a recent retreat, where I embraced simplicity and connection to the world around me over showiness and pretense." Her words drew the guests closer, the contrast between her humility and their opulence undeniable. Thomas stepped in, adding, "Ms. Reyes' journey in finance is remarkable. She's a visionary leader who has shaped Merrick Capital's growth over the past decade." He nodded respectfully toward Violet. "And she remains true to her values, despite immense success. Phones lowered as guests absorbed the revelation. Violet's quiet strength illuminated the space more powerfully than any jewel or designer dress in the room. It was a moment of reckoning. The yacht's glamorous facade clashed sharply with the elegant resilience of the woman standing barefoot before them. Caroline swallowed hard, attempting to regain composure but looked defeated beneath the spotlight. She felt exposed and small, confronted by the very person she had sought to exclude. Silence stretched for a heartbeat before scattered applause blossomed, hesitant at first but growing as many acknowledged Violet's grace and achievement. A few guests approached tentatively, expressions shifting from judgment to admiration. Violet offered no gloating smile, only a serene nod. She embodied a new kind of power, one derived not from wealth flaunted or status flaunted, but from authenticity, strength, and restraint. Her presence was a quiet rebuke to the snobbishness that had surrounded her. The crowd's mood transformed. The yacht seemed smaller, its grandeur less certain against the weight of Violet's unassuming dignity. Thomas whispered to Violet, "Shall we move to the main salon for your keynote address?" She nodded. Together they began to walk forward, Violet barefoot and assured. As she passed Caroline, their eyes met briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement of the evening's lesson: appearances deceive, and true strength often walks unshod along simple paths. Violet's story, once an unfitting shadow on this luxurious stage, now stood center and impossible to overlook. The guests, the staff, and the staff manager had been given an unexpected glimpse of humility and power combined into one undeniable presence. The yacht was no longer just a symbol of exclusivity. Tonight, it had become a vessel for change. The soft murmur of applause still echoed faintly in the grand salon when the yacht's owner, Gregory Merrick, appeared at the entrance, his tall frame and confident stride commanding immediate attention. He had arrived just in time to witness the transformation of the evening's tone, a moment neither he nor anyone else aboard would forget. Spotting Caroline, the staff manager whose earlier actions had sparked the turmoil, his gaze fixed on her with a cold intensity. Without hesitation, Gregory's voice rang out, cutting through the lingering conversations. "Caroline," he said crisply, "your conduct tonight has been unacceptable and damaging to this yacht's reputation and to our valued guests. I'm shutting down the gala immediately." The guests fell silent again, eyes wide as the gravity of his words settled. "You are to leave the premises at once, and we will discuss your future employment in due course." His tone brooked no argument. Caroline's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. The guests, previously dazzled by the chandeliers and flowing champagne, shifted their attention fully onto her, their expressions ranging from disappointment to quiet disdain. The once unshakable manager now found herself isolated and scrutinized. The ballroom, which had been alive with laughter and music moments before, began to empty as Gregory's announcement rippled through the crowd. The guests, now fully aware of the real drama unfolding, whispered among themselves, casting sidelong glances at Caroline, who was left standing awkwardly, her reputation in ruins. News of the incident and Caroline's dismissal spread rapidly both within yacht circles and on social media. Photos and videos of her dismissive treatment of Violet circulated widely, earning her widespread condemnation for unprofessionalism and class bias. Awards and invitations vanished overnight, replaced by public calls for sensitivity and inclusivity training. The backlash was swift and unforgiving, a reflection of changing societal expectations. Weeks later, inside the Merrick Capital offices, Caroline found herself summoned to a mandatory sensitivity and diversity program, an attempt to rehabilitate her tarnished image. Her demeanor was subdued, shadows of shame and regret evident in her eyes as she sat quietly during sessions meant to challenge her perceptions. One late afternoon, as the yacht prepared for another event, Caroline encountered Violet again in a softly lit hallway lined with portraits of Merrick Capital stakeholders. Violet approached without hesitation, her presence calm but unmistakably resolute. "I wanted to acknowledge you," Violet said quietly, her voice steady but warm. "Tonight was a difficult moment for you. I hope you understand the impact of your actions." She offered a small, knowing smile. "I forgive what happened, but I ask you to learn from it." Then she turned and continued on her way, leaving Caroline to absorb the weight of those words. Caroline watched her go, a mixture of humility and something new, respect, taking root within her. It was a beginning, a personal reckoning mirrored in the transformed atmosphere that now permeated the yacht and the company. That evening, Violet stepped onto the deck once more, the moonlight casting silver paths across the rolling waves. Barefoot, as always, she breathed in the salty air deeply, feeling a quiet triumph that had little to do with wealth or status, and everything to do with grace, perseverance, and truth. Around her, the guests gathered quietly, reluctant to speak, the memory of the night's events hanging like a palpable silence. She walked slowly along the deck's edge, each step a statement, not just of her journey, but of a shift reverberating through the gilded halls. The yacht, once a symbol of exclusion and snobbery, had been forever altered by Violet Reyes' presence. And those who had witnessed her strength would never forget the simple barefoot woman who had changed everything.